All right, welcome everyone to the Driving K through 12 Innovation webinar, the 2020 Perspective, hosted by COSIN. I am joined here today by a group of wonderful panelists who are all experts in K-12 innovation, really coming from different vantage points, whether working in schools or technologists or additional perspectives. And we're going to be talking about the initiative called Driving K through 12 Innovation. And we have an advisory board comprised of global leaders who work in education daily and are in the trenches and working around key issues as it relates to driving K through 12 innovation. And I'll ask just one more time, if you're not speaking, to please mute yourself right now. I'm getting a pretty bad echo or static noise. So thank you so much in advance for please muting yourself. Otherwise, we'll find you and mute you with love. Okay, thank you. So for those of you that want to learn more about the initiative, here's the website, or not the website, but here's a little bit of a description of it. And here's the hashtag as we discuss this initiative here today. And if you have viewpoints that you would like to share, of course, the Zoom chat is available for those discussions, and we highly recommend you engage with each other that way. But for all you tweeters in the audience, there is a hashtag that we use year-round for this project. So if you're thinking, oh, I'd like to share about the report or lend some perspectives around it, that's the hashtag to use. This initiative is made possible with thanks to our sponsors. So thank you so much to ClassLink, Google, AWS, Kajit, ENA, and Diamond Assets for their great support of this initiative for the 2019-2020 cycle. Last year was our inaugural cycle of the Driving K through 12 Innovation Project. We learned a lot, and we've made some great adjustments this year. And so for those of you who haven't heard of Driving K-12 Innovation or who maybe are new to it, what is it all about? So this is a series of publications to talk about the hurdles that are essentially roadblocks and barriers to driving K through 12 innovation, the accelerators or the megatrends that we're feeling in all parts of society that are really causing major changes to our education system, sort of from the outside in, as well as the technology enablers. What are the tools that are helping us overcome some of the challenges and to help take advantage of the accelerators and societal megatrends? And we present this content in a series of publications that are free to download from the COSIN website. So you can go to cosin.org to download the 2019 publications. And there will be a couple publications forthcoming. The 2020 Hurdles and Accelerators publication will be out in conjunction with the annual COSIN conference in April. And then the Tech Enablers publication will be out in conjunction with the annual ISTE conference taking place in 2020. And so we are pleased to have a sneak peek here today and join with some of our advisory board members. And we're going to be talking about, and as we're talking about the series and we're getting opinions and perspectives from the people in the trenches, just keep this in the back of your mind. This series is great for you to use if you're developing products. So if you, for example, work for a company in the audience, or if you're doing strategic planning, are you a CTO, a CIO, a superintendent, an administrator, a principal? There's also nothing like this currently available. Some of you may have heard or be familiar with the Horizon reports in the K through 12 series that COSIN used to lead with the New Media Consortium. Well, the New Media Consortium ceased to exist in 2017, and COSIN did not want there to be any void in the field and wanted to make sure that there's still a blueprint, a roadmap for strategic planning around emerging technology. And this is very much our answer to that. And so definitely take advantage of this. What's also unique about it, and my colleague Lara is going to speak to in just a bit, is that the topics that we're going to talk about today and the topics that are featured in the series aren't determined just by COSIN alone or by me or any of the singular viewpoints of the panelists on the call today. They're decided by an advisory board, in this case, of 100 people who spend a lot of time thinking about what are the trends, challenges, and technology developments that they're grappling with that the rest of the world needs to be thinking about and planning for. So next, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Lara Geringer, who is the Project and Community Manager for Driving K-12 Innovation. And Lara is working closely with our advisory board and is happy to explain to you a little bit more about what that process is like and what our advisory board looks like. So over to you, Lara.
Hello, everyone. I am delighted to share a little bit more about what the advisory board has been up to. First, as Sam mentioned, the advisory board consists of approximately 100 experts from around the globe. We have 6 countries represented and 22 US states at the moment represented. And this is school leaders, educators, technologists, as well as people who don't fit into those traditional labels, all with unique perspectives and experiences, engaging in conversation and trying to learn from each other and synthesize insights to share. So I'd love to share a little bit about the advisory board process. And so the advisory board deals with 3 broad categories or topics. These are hurdles, accelerators, and technology enablers, which Sam will get into a little bit more as we go. But the advisory board does 2 phases of work. In the first phase, we consider hurdles and accelerators. And in the second phase, we consider tech enablers. And so for each of these phases, we go through this process. We started with a pre-survey in June, and this was really to focus the topics of discussion. We had dozens of potential hurdles and accelerators that the advisory board could consider and had decided last year were important to the field. But we really wanted to focus our discussion on those that are most critical, most timely. And so through this survey, the advisory board highlighted 20 hurdles and 16 accelerators, including some new ones that were developed this year. And these topics were carried forward into the discussion phase. So we had about 2 months for the advisory board to engage with each other and really dig into these different topics, figure out what they mean, figure out how they're manifesting, figure out how we could overcome hurdles, take advantage of accelerators. And this was a combination of prompts to get the discussion going, and then some really rich conversation between advisory board members, all in online forums. And then we're actually in the process right now of doing a post-survey where the advisory board is synthesizing all of the discussion and selecting the top 5 most important hurdles and most important accelerators for driving K-12 innovation in 2020, which will be communicated out in a report next year. And then we're going to go through this whole process again with tech enablers starting next month. So a little bit more about the discussions phase. We have this awesome online platform where advisory board members engage asynchronously from wherever they are and can really see each other's perspectives and respond to each other's comments and try to get into some of the nuance, the complexity. This isn't a series of answering prompts and going about your business. It's really engaging with each other, which has been really inspiring to me as my first year on the project. So as you can see, we have over 600 different discussion posts, so lots of conversation going on. And with that, I think I will turn it back over to Sam and let us get into the heart of our discussion today.
Thank you so much, Lara. Truly, I'm so thankful for our panelists. Those of you who are on the advisory board also, and maybe who may not be serving on the webinar panel today, make sure to say so in the chat and discuss or share what your perspective and experience has been like on the advisory board. Love to hear from you. Thank you so much for all your contributions. So enough for me. Let's hear from a cross-section, a great representation, a composite, if you will, of this advisory board that Lara discussed. Joining me today are 4 K-12 professionals, and I'll give them just a little bit of time to introduce themselves so you know a little bit more about them and their background. So let's start with you, Beth.
All right, thank you so much, Sam. So hi everyone, my name is Beth Holland. I am actually the Digital Equity Project Director for CoSN. So I work part-time for CoSN, examining areas of digital equity. I also oversee the Rural Project. And in addition to that, I'm right now a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Rhode Island, where I've been working Actually, I'm part of the U.S. Department of Education's Ready to Learn program for the last 9 months. But I've been an academic tech director in the past. I've done teacher professional development around ideas of ed tech in the past. And my current work is a lot more focused on leadership and helping to lead innovation and change. So I was very excited to be part of this advisory this year.
Thanks for joining us, Beth. How about you, Frankie?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Frankie Jackson. I have spent 25 years as a Chief Technology Officer, working primarily in 2 different districts. The first district, I worked about 19 years. It was about a district of about 25,000 students, and then finished my last 6 years as a CTO working for K-12 with 117,000 students and 14,000 employees. So it was a mega district. Prior to that, I have a software engineering background and a master's in instructional technology. So I enjoy the technical details of the K-12 industry. I worked actually for NASA, supporting the space shuttle and operations contracts, and served as a Baldrige examiner. So my interest and just absolute honor for serving on the advisory board has really been from the leadership perspective and the day-to-day operations of what K-12 CTOs work through in bringing great technologies into school systems and dealing with organizational cultures and leadership and change. And just working on the advisory board has been really a career highlight. The discussions that Laura talked about are real and not so much heated, but filled with some very healthy debate about how to drive innovation in K-12. So it's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm looking forward to the webinar.
Thank you so much, Frankie. It's that discourse that is a really important thread and for this initiative. So thank you for bringing that up. Michael, how are you doing today?
Good morning. Thank you. Coming from Shanghai today. I may have to cut the video a little bit because the VPN is not working correctly with all the protests in Hong Kong. The government's a little bit on the spy side, and we're bandwidth a little bit on the a little bit short. Good morning or good afternoon. I work here at the Shanghai School, International School. I've been overseas for most of my teaching career, though I've taught in the state of Texas for a few years, from Saudi Arabia to Hong Kong for 20, and then now here in Shanghai for about the past 15. I teach grade 8, currently humanities. In addition to that, I teach a big data class for middle school students, and we just started that this year. As well as I teach media, helping students with moving from that consumer to a creator. And we've had that course in for the past 3 or 4 years. And just like to say the Horizon Report has really been used at our school a lot for emphasizing our strategic plan and helping us jumpstart some of our programs. And I'm going to talk about today, and that's learning spaces. And we've done a lot with that. And so just very appreciative to the members on the committee who have helped us and who have inspired us and helped us move our school forward, even though they may not know that, but they have. Thank you.
Oh, I love that. That's a testament to the peer-to-peer network that is the advisory board and how we all learn from each other. And Michael, you're a testament to the truly global nature and perspective of this work. Thank you for joining us today. Phil, I know you're also somewhere where it might be a little hard to have your video on. So where are you coming from? And I know Phil mentioned earlier he is at an airport, and there may be some background noise that he's going to try and navigate around. So Phil, if you're able to introduce yourself, that would be great. If not, we'll get you here in just a second. Okay, well, I'll just take a moment to introduce myself. I'm Samantha Becker, and I'm actually the project director for Driving K-12 Innovation. My world has very much been about educational technology for a long time. Formerly, I was the project director for the Horizon Project and working at the NMC and partnered with COSIN for many, many years. So this is my privilege and honor to be here today. And in addition, In addition to my project director gig at COSN, I am the executive director for creative and communications at Arizona State University, right up there in their technology office. So that's my day job, and this is truly an honor and a fun role for me to be playing. So Phil, I don't know if you have the ability to share a little bit about yourself. Awesome.
Yeah. Good day. Phil Neufeld. I've had 35 years experience leading organizations, mostly on technology front, private firms and NGOs and several industries. And then I left the private sector to serve in higher ed, and I'm now at a K-12 district with 74,000 students at Fresno Unified School District. And I also get to co-lead a large personalized blended learning initiative. We're in our 4th year with affecting over 25,000 students and over 700 teachers. My mission is to shape educational ecosystems to prepare every student for work, learning, and life, what I call their as yet imagined future. These COSUN publications help keep me focused on the critical high leverage accelerators and aware of the hurdles that others share and how we avoid letting them impact our outcomes.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Phil. We really appreciate it, and especially you serving on the advisory board. So now to get into the heart of the program, now that we've met our panelists, we're going to actually kind of showcase some of the healthy and hearty discourse and discussions that actually take place in the workspace that Laura shared about. So what are hurdles? Just really quickly, our panelists are about to talk about some of the hurdles that really matter and are important to them. So just to level set with the audience, we define hurdles as roadblocks that force schools to slow down, prepare themselves, and make the leap. So sometimes things that are hurdles actually may be Trojan horses for something better and to make a real improvement in your school system. So here are all the hurdles considered by the advisory board this time around. They took an initial survey, as Laura mentioned in the process slide, and they pared it down to what they believe were going to be the most important ones to discuss in the workspace. So that way we weren't kind of trying to take on too much. So they decided as a group what to focus on. So you can see in black the original accelerators that they had the original hurdles that they had talked about, and the new ones added by the advisory board. And then the gray text is hurdles not selected by the advisory board for discussion. Okay, so now we're going to get to a segment of the conversation with the panelists today where we ask them each to pick a hurdle. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to pick one of those hurdles that you saw flashed before you on the screen, to define it so we could kind of level set on what we actually mean by the hurdle. I'm also going to ask them to share why it will be the most imperative hurdle for schools and school systems to address in 2020. And then I'm going to ask them on a scale from 1 to 5, with 1 being easy peasy given some training, and 5 being nearly impossible, how insurmountable is this hurdle? So we're going to get a definition. We're going to find out from each panel why it's so important for us to address in 2020. And then we're going to quantify and kind of get some scoring going on. Sound fun? Okay, let's start with you, Frankie. What is the hurdle, what's the hurdle and how would you define it?
I'll start with organizational culture, and I think this is near and dear to my heart because, if we look at the definition, an organizational culture really refers to the patterns that predict outcomes within an organization. So, for example, patterns in decision making and in communication and collaboration and all the things that are difficult, like relationships and values and leadership and accountability. Sometimes it's those things in the culture that really define the inner workings and the expectations and the attitudes and beliefs that contribute to the behavior of an organization. So it's not as much technical as it is just this intangible organizational culture. And, it's really anchored into the social norms and the order of an organization, and then the leadership. And it's determined by leadership values and priorities, and it influences every interaction that goes on within an organization. So I think it's important to me because it's necessary to intentionally create the culture and leadership in education that really reflect our values and foster innovation and really aligns with our actions and how we get our jobs done. And so this is extremely important to me. And so being part of the advisory board, of course, when I saw this hurdle, I jumped on it as quick as I could and worked with others that were part of the board that had the same interest in I. And that was the most exciting part of it, because it was that healthy discourse of going back and forth about what is organizational culture. It really led me to do a lot of research about what some of the companies like Zappos and Amazon and Microsoft and Google are doing about culture. And so it expanded my view about how important culture was even before I started, working on the advisory board. So, for me personally, I shared that I'd worked 25 years in a school system as a chief technology officer. And, the culture really just drives the entire school system's vision for technology. And working in the last district that I was with 117,000 students, I had the opportunity to observe day after day that it was a district that was built on a culture and a mindset of leading the way and finding a way in every student every day. And these weren't really taglines. These were models and culture that the district lived by. They believed it, their vision, their mission, the values, the Board of Education, all the stakeholders embedded that in their culture. And as a result, remarkable achievements occurred. And we made some great technology achievements. It's evidenced by passing a $1.2 billion bond, a very large bond that included a big technology package. Just in May, another bond of $1.8 billion was approved. So it was a whole community that had a culture of innovation, a culture of wanting to be the very best that it could be in pre-K through 12. And I saw it work and was impressed, and that's why it's so important to me.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And Frankie, how would you score it? How easy do you think this is going to be to solve? 1 being easy, we can do this year, it's happening. 5 being almost insurmountable.
It's not insurmountable. I think there's pockets of great examples and best practices, but I think, for it to be sustainable across the entire nation, or actually, we're working internationally here, it's not insurmountable. I think it's, I'd probably rate it a 3 if you were wanting in a specific example. I think the hurdle is really about starting a bigger conversation about the importance of organizational culture and finding best practices and models of extraordinary organizational cultures inside and outside of K-12.
Thank you, Frankie. I really appreciate that. Really quickly, I'll go out to our other panelists. Does anyone want to build on that? Anyone have a different or viewpoint to build upon Frankie's in terms of organizational culture? I saw Phil, for example, had a great comment in the chat.
Just to build on that a little bit, it was talking about Microsoft and Google and these organizations who have actually disrupted, particularly Uber and Airbnb and these particular organizations. And one of the things that I think we could do in education is what I call the 80-20 model. Parents say they want innovation, but when they go to look for a school, they're also still thinking about the past. And so they can't quite let go because they don't want to be an experiment. And they also know what has worked for them was somewhat of a success. So it's called the 80-20 model. We keep 80% of what we have, and then we try to build on something new using 20%. And then eventually that 20% becomes part of the 80%, and then we can start another kind of frame or another kind of progress. But it's trying to get out there and experiment a little bit in some form or some fashion, our sandbox, if we want to call it that, and then keep what we have, what parents feel comfortable with. But then it also gives parents an opportunity to see they are pioneering, they are moving ahead, and they are thinking and doing some kind of vision.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And Michael will actually stick with you as I go back here and ask you to pick a hurdle. So Frankie's picked organizational culture as what she believes on the advisory board member to be the most imperative hurdle to address in 2020. What do you think you think is the most imperative hurdle?
Well, there's several on there I would choose, but tonight or this morning I'll choose evolution of teaching. And one of the things I continue to somewhat raise with us in our community is that we had the 21st century, and we were about to enter it, and we all remember where we were for the year 2000. We were all worried about the YK, and we've moved into the 21st century, and now we're in 2020 almost. And as a result of that 21st century, during the year 2000 to the year 2020, I continue to think about, what have we done? What have we changed? And sometimes I refer to, we've gone from the blackboard to the whiteboard to the smart board, and I'm not sure what the next board's going to be, but we're not evolving like we should, because actually learning has evolved, but we haven't evolved ourselves as teachers. For example, learning's evolved. We're doing more online kind of things. We're doing more collaborative learning, such as here we are with Zoom. We're also doing, technology has really been part of that accelerator. And so therefore our hurdle has been the evolution of teaching. In addition to that, we talked about personalized learning, and that's been around for a long time, but we really haven't moved that forward as much. And we have all these online hybrids we're trying to do, and as face-to-face continues to unfold, we're still having these benchmarks and these packages geared around these old kind of formats that we haven't necessarily evolved with our own teaching. And I'm not sure what's sort of holding us back. We're sort of, when we get in these comfort zones where change could be constant, but I know policies and districts continue to hold us back. But this evolution of teaching has begun, but has moved us fast enough. That's just a personal opinion. I would say, I'm just going to just add a little bit more. I was saying, we have genetics, and we have algorithms, and we have these other kind of curriculum topics that we don't necessarily discuss, like data journalism. And so therefore our curriculum has still remained, even on the report card, if we look at it, it's still social studies, or it's still speaking and reading and writing and listening, when it's so much more. And we talk about these soft skills, but we're really not giving that, we're not really raising the flag for those particular skills, such as presentation skills, or how do you collaborate, or where are you showing initiative, or where's your grit? What does that look like for you today? Where's your discussion level? Where's your engagement? And we're just holding on to still a bit, I believe, in the bit of the domain of knowledge. And so we need to shift out of that knowledge base and really move towards something that's more in the helping students have experiences, creating memories, and those kind of things. Simulations and so forth.
Yes, and I see that you have other members of the audience completely on board with that as well. For the sake of time, I won't ask a panelist to build on that. What I'll do is ask those in the chat to build on Michael's viewpoint and what he shared, and maybe how you're experiencing that in your own school districts or systems. Next up, on your mark, get set, go, Beth. What hurdle have you chosen, and why is it the most imperative one for schools to address in 2020?
I wanted to build on Michael's. Okay, we can do a hurdle.
You may start by building on Michael's.
Well, okay, good, because I'll connect it and make a segue. How is that, if that's fair? I'm not very good at following directions sometimes, which that may actually be my point. And it's funny because I intentionally shied away a little bit from that discussion on the evolution of teaching, because I think what we almost need is not an evolution, but a return to the past. I think if we go back and we look at what great learning has looked like throughout history, if we take a perspective before there was the introduction of schooling, and schooling being essentially the institutionalization of what we know as, like Larry Cuban and David Tyack would call it the age-graded school, so what we know today, it really was about meaningful, rich experiences. It was about building community, sharing knowledge. John Seeley Brown wrote a great article about the need to return to the one-room schoolhouse, when we had communities of practice, when students taught each other, when they could engage in deep inquiry, and when they had time. And so I think in a lot of ways, there's those principles that need to be allowed to come back, and the technology really can facilitate a lot of those things. Segue. The technology can facilitate all of those things when you actually have access. And so I know we joked a little bit, but as the digital equity project director, I have to say that mine is most important. But I do think that what we really need to look at is the fact that all of our students should have equitable access to learning. And I'm phrasing that very succinctly because there has been pushback saying, oh, well, we have internet access or we have devices. And I would say that that's become a measure of digital equality. But now digital equity is becoming a much more nuanced conversation. And so it's not, beyond looking at it as, say, the first tier of, do students have access to the devices that would best support them as learners? Do students have access to high-speed internet? At COSIN, we talk a lot about the homework gap. It's not just about having access at home, but about having access, not just access at school, but having access at home. And to tie in as well to what Michael was saying about teaching, and I've had a lot of conversations about this term of homework gap. I think more important than whether or not a student might try to actually do some homework, but what happens when a student is curious? What happens when a student is doing something that may not require internet access and all of a sudden is like, I really want to learn more? When we don't have that equitable access, we're removing opportunity from that child. And so, at that base level, how are we doing that? And then moving forward, what are the opportunities and experiences that our students are able to engage in? I'm a big fan of some of the early ed tech from the late 90s. And I was talking to someone who said, I didn't know there was technology in the 90s. There was fabulous technology at the end of the 90s, where students were doing things like being immersed in environments and engaging in rich, meaningful inquiry-based science, where they were building, knowledge communities. And I mean, it was old school technology itself, like dial up. I remember being on my AOL connection, like trying to get in to some things when I was in grad school. But at the same time, it was creating these opportunities to inquire and research and create and connect to other people. Those are the meaningful experiences, building back to what Michael was saying with, how do we collaborate? How do we connect? How do we synthesize information? So there's that aspect of digital equity. And then on my other advisory, so with my digital equity advisory, we've also been discussing the challenges that aren't discussed. So for example, what about AI and algorithmic literacy? Are our students learning how to critically assess the information being presented to them as students? Or are they just doing drill and practice? What's going to happen with those students and with those discrepancies? We've been talking about debates around screen time, which typically come from a position of privilege. If as a parent in a middle income or affluent community, I can take my child to a museum, that's great, go to the museum. What if I can't? As a researcher through the Ready to Learn program, we're asking the question, could media create opportunity in an underserved community where that opportunity doesn't exist? And so I know there's some discussion, the digital equity is not a big deal anymore. We've got devices, they're cheap, we've got internet, but it's such a more layered, nuanced conversation. I think that it's one that will be around for quite some time.
Beth, thank you. That was fabulous. I think you covered so much territory, and I've seen Phil also building upon your perspective in the chat, which is great. I'll ask formally if any other panelists would like to build on this lens of digital equity.
Well, I think all three of us have really talked about interrelated topics that you can't have one without the other. The evolution of teaching with the accessibility and change the organizational culture and leadership to support it. So that's really one of the things that have amazed me about this whole process is that they really are building blocks one over the other, and so I think it's a great way to explore innovation.
Thank you, Frank.
And I want to add one other piece, and I want to call it the necessary conditions. Sometimes this isn't very exciting, but we've got to have the conditions in place that facilitate rather than hinder the transformation of social practices, deep integration of better practices, things like working digital ecosystems, at a minimum, things like furniture, things like power, the necessary things so that teachers, students can move to these quality learning experiences and not have to be distracted by, things that are around them that are getting in the way.
Thank you, Phil. Really well said. Let's stick with you for a moment and ask you on your mark, ready, set, go to pick the hurdle that you believe is going to be the most imperative for schools to address in 2020.
Ongoing professional development is huge. It's what determines the capacity of our human capital and the resulting student outcomes. This work ensures educators are better prepared for their roles and with strategic practices that better support student learning outcomes within the global and local context. This hurdle can be overcome by prioritizing time and funding to cultivate educator understanding of frameworks, strategies, and practices through effective, experiential, and actionable face-to-face and online professional learning experiences that reflect and move towards desired learning experiences for the students. And that through dynamic professional learning communities and networks that go across disciplines and beyond district boundaries, and supported with job-embedded coaching, whisper and virtual coaching, and peer supports. But I'd say it's a 5, and it's hard work because most educators emerge from educational systems whose practices and intended outcomes are not yet aligned with future-ready learning. Also, the norm for training is often static rather than dynamic learning experiences for adults. The research from Linda Darling-Hammond, though, suggests that, and is corroborated with research at our district and at universities, shows that effectively designed professional learning makes a statistically significant impact on learning outcomes, and that's what we often forget. So we're seeing reduced time and commitment to professional learning because we were judging it by the drive-by static kind of experience. Ultimately, the people we have are the people who must choose and commit to the new roles and the transformative instruction. Yet the future we must prepare our students for is already present with us. And so there's a great urgency here that we need to take seriously, invest in the human capital, and make sure it fits the contextual outcomes that we're seeking.
Thank you so much, Phil. Much appreciated that perspective. Curious to see if other panelists have thoughts to build on that.
Can I jump in?
Please.
All right, so I think I love the way that Phil really has expanded on the definition and made sure that we're not thinking of professional development as like the one and done workshop model or I'm going to call it the pre and post, the like day before school and the day after school. And, Phil, we can share research another day. I can give you a mountain of it that, yes, professional development can have a significant effect, but only when it's done well and it's sustained and it's ongoing, and it really creates opportunity. And an article that I really love from, I can try and get you the whole citation. It was about 6 authors, but the short of it is it's actually called Focus, Fiddle, and Friends. And the idea that great professional development requires that specific focus. What are we trying to do? There's the time allowed for teachers to explore and experiment and sort of fiddle with that idea. And then there's friends, like how are we building a real community around this idea of improvement? And when you look especially at international systems versus like the US system, a real distinguishing factor of excellent systems is what they call the professionalization of the sector. So how are these professional opportunities existing where everyone builds this language of improvement, this language of pedagogy, this language of what we're really trying to do? And I think that's going to be that's part of this really big hurdle of how do we create that sentiment so that we can actually, have this professional sector that's moving forward. And to come back to Michael, to consider that evolution of, what does it look and sound like and mean to be a teacher in this new world that we're in right now.
Thank you. I think that's a great closing thought for our initial discussions of the most imperative hurdles. Something a little bit different. I'm going to go back a slide and show you again in the audience and refresh the advisory board as well, all of the hurdles that were discussed and considered throughout our process. We talk a lot, especially in the series, you see what makes the cut, right? You see what the advisory board members are voting for. What you don't always see is sometimes there's not always consensus along the way. And definitely with a diversity of viewpoints, there is going to be discourse, as Frankie brought up earlier. And so I'm going to ask the panelists, any regrets, any hurdles that are on the list that you either don't believe should make the cut, or you think people might be focusing on a little bit too much, or maybe they've been miscategorized and they're not even hurdles at all. Talk to me about any differing viewpoints you might have.
Well, I'll speak up first. I mean, I think they're all valid, or they wouldn't be on the list. And so it's really a matter of organizing them in priority to look at root cause and look at systemic change. And so I really liked the lack of systemic perspectives, because we've already talked about one hurdle is interrelated with another, and so there isn't any one that I don't think belongs on the list. I think they all belong on the list. There are some that speak to me, and those that speak to me are those that are root cause, figuring out how to get to solve a problem at that we're not working to solve a symptom. For example, professional development is a symptom of leadership in a culture that doesn't value educating the leaders and the professional community. So I'm more inclined to want to focus on what we can solve, what we can overcome in terms of resolving a problem at the root level.
Thank you
at
so
the
much.
Foundation level. Yep.
No, this is great. I really appreciate this. And for those of you looking at the clock like me, I know we've got about 15, 16 minutes left, so we're going to keep moving right along. And what I'll ask the audience, if you have questions along the way, don't be waiting for the end of anything. Please be putting them in the chat, and I'll ask panelists, especially when you're not speaking, to just keep your eye in the chat. And if there's any questions being directed at you or that you might have a response to get in there in the chat with the audience. So we're going to keep moving right along, and I'll also ask panelists to keep an eye towards brevity. To our accelerators, sort of the next part of the advisory board workspace discussions. What do we mean by accelerators? Well, these are real-world megatrends that drive the needs and skills expected of learners and practitioners. So education and our education systems aren't insular, right? They're positioned in the world and the rest of society. So how are the trends that we're experiencing around us impacting K through 12? So here's just a quick glimpse of all the accelerators considered by the advisory board. You can see the black are the originals, the blue are new ones proposed by the advisory board, and the gray ones didn't make the cut in the initial survey to even be discussed this time around. So now is our pedal to the metal segment, and similar to the hurdles and on your mark segment, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to share the accelerator that they feel will be the most vital for schools to embrace in 2020, and to also help us define it so we know what we mean. So I'm going to kind of jump around and start with you, Michael. What accelerator have you chosen?
Yes, re-imaging the classroom, or re-imaging learning spaces. And I often tell parents whenever they're on open house, where's the worst place that you can come to learn? And I will say my classroom. And the reason I say that is 4 walls. And there's so much more outside here, particularly in Shanghai with a population of 23 million. And that we sometimes get lost within our own classroom with our own little bubble. And so some of the things, this has been one of the drivers that we've used with the Horizon report to help us move forward with our learning spaces. So we've created maker spaces. In fact, we have 2 maker spaces for our student population of about 1,300. In addition to that, we're trying to build a DIY area in the community. In other words, a DIY kind of warehouse. And we're looking at seeing what we might do with that as part of our service project to the community. We have a cafe area at our school, and we really try to use that as a place for students to display their work. Perhaps maybe they created an app, and then we have some small computers along the wall, and then students can engage and learn see what other students are doing. In addition to that, you might see a bike somewhere in a various location, a stationary bike for students to, if they need to take a break or a 10-minute break from class, and they may get on a bike to do some fitness area. I'm working with a school in Vietnam, and we're getting ready to do some startups there. And one of the things that we're doing is trying to put the fitness room, the weight room, somewhat, so to speak, but more or less a wellness fitness center. And that's going to be more in the central hub of the school because we value fitness and we value character. And we feel like maybe that might bring a change of culture. In addition to that, you will see park benches at our school. One of the things that we're struggling with here in Asia is the pollution level. There's a lot of days for all of us, climate change is coming. And so how do we bring this outdoors, indoors? So we're looking at some kind of ways that we can create that kind of, not a forest or a jungle kind of thing, but it's something that does represent some kind of feel that does have that outdoor space. And we're looking at that as well. We're looking at, we have rooftop gardens, we have culinary arts, and we're trying to figure out how we can bring that into our cafeteria space. Kids set up the cafeteria in a way, maybe like 12 to 15 kids, and they have a special luncheon at their particular time. So it's always evolving and things are changing. And I'd just like to give the Horizon report, or the report that we're working on now, a lift and a celebration for that, because that's really been, it's been really instrumental for us.
Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing that. And so Michael's referencing the Horizon Report series, which are still accessible on EDUCAUSE's website, but the Driving K-12 Innovation Series, it really is
Yes.
a fantastic series, as Michael's talking about, you know, how to use it around these kind of strategic planning activities. Thank you so much for sharing, Michael. Phil, I'm going to kick it over to you. Certainly, if you have a build to what Michael said, we'd love to hear it. Otherwise, let's hear what accelerator you've chosen is the most vital to embrace.
Perfect. I second Michael's points, and I've added something in the chat about that, but I think collaborative learning is really critical. And it's fairly hard to do because it's in conflict with identity of subject matter expert and controlled classroom that a secondary and a higher ed teacher or faculty often have. It's also challenging to get good at it because you need strategies for how do you group students and how do you use data to group students, and how do you create meaningful collaboration, you know, not just the group project where one student does all the contribution. A good reference there is 21 CLD, and as an example of that. But where it occurs, it really moves students with drive. It drives deeper learning. It builds 21st century skills. You want to learn more about that? See the published studies about our work at Fresno State and Fresno Unified, where we talk about what that really means to students and how that is something powerful for them and also prepares them for the workplace and success in education.
Thank you so much for sharing, Phil. Really appreciate it. And yes, 21 CLD is a fantastic framework. Highly recommend it. And that said, I'd like to pass it over, Beth. If you have a build, great. If not, pick your accelerator.
Oh, I'm going to keep segueing. This is really fun. So I think the accelerator that I picked the other day when we were talking about was this idea of like the world as habitual learning environment. And I think that really actually is a bit of a synthesis of both what Michael and what Phil were saying, that, you know, students, actually, let me back up. I'm going to just cite this one. Professor Josh Eiler, who's at the University of Mississippi, has a great book, by the way, called How Humans Learn. And in it, he talks about if we really truly want students to be able to learn, we have to have what he calls authenticity, meaning the learning has to be authentic to the learner. And that's not necessarily the, oh, we're going to go on a field trip to the pond and like take water measurements and, oh, it's in the real world and therefore it's this, you know, authentic experience. But instead, it's how do we value play? How do we value the things that are really driving our students? How do we create these opportunities where our students think that the learning is super meaningful to them? And so I think that's where it really comes in with, you know, the power of mobile devices, that the power of network technologies, that we can have the entire world as our classroom. You know, it harkens back to like the Reggio days, the Reggio Emilia model from Italy of, you know, the entire world was the classroom. And if a student was curious, then the role of the teacher was to inspire that curiosity and carry it forward. And knowing that we have so much access now when we have our digital equity, just to hold on to that, to be able to create these experiences, you know, that we can reimagine learning spaces and we can do more with real collaborative learning, where students can be working not just with their classmates like in the same physical space, but kind of like what we've been doing with the advisory, that we can work across distance and time. And so I think it's really this mindset shift of going, what happens when we really see the world as the classroom and not inside the four walls of the building?
So well said. I was just planning to type in the chat, but I'll share it here. My daughter is 2 and attends a Reggio Emilio daycare program. And I think back to like the spirit of a 2-year-old and who we are born as learners, these naturally curious beings that learn by play and exploration. And how do we not lose that thread as we grow and even as adult lifelong learners? So thank you so much, Beth, for sharing. I'd love to kick things over to you, Frankie. If you want to build on that, please do. Otherwise, we'd love to hear which accelerator you've chosen.
Okay. I'll shorten it because of time, but again, I love how this worked that I was last, because I think, you know, the accelerator that I'm most interested in is building the human capacity of leaders. And it really just comes down to who lead matters. Everything rises and falls on leadership. And so building the human capacity of leadership, you know, it starts with us and it starts with those that are above us, and finding ways to lead meaningful change and explore how we do all the things that we've talked about today, and also the things that we've worked together on the advisory board that positively changes how students learn and how their experiences can help them be successful. And so I think we need to move from a smaller vision to a bigger vision that will take root in our school systems and grow from there. Because again, it falls on the capacity of the leadership and how we move our nation forward in being successful in K-12.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I just sort of want to close out this accelerator discussion by adding that I think all of this, you know, I know you're here today in the audience because you care, because you're a leader, you're an educator, you want to move your school, your organization forward. But maybe not everyone in your school system shares that same, or that you work with maybe shares that same mindset or that same goal. But a lot of what's been discussed today really is so much a shared responsibility across a multitude of roles. And so I think just to kind of tie a bow on this, a common thread I see is the need for stakeholder inclusion. And so as school leaders and educators who are being involved in the strategic planning, and not just the strategic planning as a final draft that gets printed and posted, but how then are you continuously iterating on those strategies and bringing in stakeholder voices along the way, you know, measuring what's working and what's not, and then adapting. So I want to thank our panelists for talking, for selecting these accelerators and sharing their viewpoints. And then because we did this for hurdles and it's only fair to do for accelerators, I bring you to a segment called Hype Hype Hooray. Are any of the accelerators that have been discussed by the advisory board, do you believe have been overhyped and we sort of need to kind of pull back on? Michael, I know you kind of had one that we discussed in rehearsal, so not to pick on you, but what are you thinking?
Yes, one of the things I think sometimes is data. I know for a lot of faculty, when we hear the word data, we just begin to cringe and we begin to pull and withdraw. And I think one of the things that we need to just really sort of re-image a little bit is what data can bring to the table. One of the things is I think sometimes we focus too much on the learning, and maybe we do, or too much on the teaching, maybe we do look at the learning, or maybe it's vice versa. One of the things recently we've done at our school is that we've actually hired this year for the first time a data scientist. For those of you that may know Tableau, it's a wonderful program. And so how do we take all this information, all this exhaustive data, and then make something out of it so that we can actually use it to help improve learning? It's not necessarily, it is part of the future of what we do. We all have data. We have how many likes we have. We look at how many followers we have. We look at how many, what's the number of subscriptions that we have on something. So that all this does play into it. And but I do think it can take away from the humanizing aspect of what we're doing and our humanistic approach with teaching, because it is all about relationships, and I'm not sure that we can ever quantify that. And so we don't want to lose that. I mean, We know that students go to school for 3 reasons, and that's for social, social, and social. But we also know, well, what makes the biggest difference in teaching is relationships. And I would say that 3 times: relationships, relationships, relationships. So I'm not sure if data can really drive that sometimes, because sometimes things in life are just simply common sense, and it's just something very easy to sort of see and fix, or it's just easy to build, and we can get lost in this exhaust. And so I would just say sometimes maybe data might have a bit too hype sometimes.
Well said, Michael. Thank you for bringing that up. I'll say this: with data, we just have to be careful of what we're measuring, that we're measuring the right things, and that we're being very descriptive and understanding of what our definitions are for words like active users. What is an active user? Increased engagement. How are we actually defining and measuring engagement? When you kind of peel back the layers, sometimes it's like a little onion-like, and sometimes it stinks. We know engagement isn't synonymous with a visit to a course page, for example. That's not real engagement. That's just a visit. And so some caution for data-driven practices are fantastic, and we want more evidence-based approaches. But how are we defining what we measure? So with that said, I want to thank all of our panelists so much for joining us here today. Thank you to the whole COSN team. Thank you to the whole advisory board, to Lara, our fearless community manager. Thank you for your time. Watch this space of cosin.org/driving K-12 innovation, or sorry, cosin.org/K-12 innovation. We're going to be updating it with new information shortly. The advisory board is just finishing voting on the top hurdles and accelerators that are going to make the final report that comes out in April. But before that report comes out, we're going to want to hear from the audience on any project examples or research that you know of pertaining to any of the winning accelerators or hurdles that get carried forward. So be on the lookout for announcements from COSN, or just watch the cosin.org website for updates. Thank you once again for spending your morning, afternoon, or evening with us, depending on where in the world you're tuning in from, and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you. Just going to end the recording.
Conversation.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.